please feel free to ask any immediate questions that you might have. I'll do my best to answer them. With that being said, though, we kindly encourage you to please save your questions to the end. We will have a Q&A portion where Ainsley can chat with you directly. We can answer some of your questions, and we will do that when the presentation is finished. One other request, we do invite you to please leave your cameras on if that feels comfortable for you. We always love to see your faces. But please do turn your microphones off so that we can just hear clearly, sorry, without any background noise and cell phones and all that business. So from here on out, I am going to pass it over to Ainsley, and I'm excited. I hope you guys are too.
Yeah, so thank you for that intro, Kylie. Hello, everyone. It's so good to meet you, to be here. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. I know life can be busy, so I really appreciate you being here. And I'm super excited to talk about all things attachment and geek out about it a little bit. So like Kylie said, my name is Ainsley, and I'm a registered clinical counselor with No Fear Counseling. So we are going to jump right in pretty quickly, but just as a little agenda for today, some of the things that we're going to be talking about center around like what is attachment, what are attachment styles, what are the characteristics of each attachment style, and how can we try to move towards more secure attachment. Yeah, so we are going to try to make this presentation or this webinar a little bit more interactive. So there will be some polls throughout that you can answer on Zoom. So I really encourage you to answer so you can get your say out there, and it all is anonymous. So you can say kind of whatever comes to mind without any fear of embarrassment or anything like that. So yeah, I hope that that makes it a little bit more comfortable to share. Yeah, and like Kylie said, she'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have some things to say, she'll be monitoring that and trying to best answer that. But we do have a Q&A at the end where you can maybe write down your questions and save it for them. So we can start to get into it. So I'm not sure if you did the attachment quiz before this, but my first question is actually going to be a poll question or a survey question about how much you know about attachment or attachment theory, just to get an idea of your understanding on it. So I was just a little bit curious about how much each of you know, whether you know nothing about it, this is the first time hearing about it, you know a little bit, like maybe you know your attachment style, but not that much about it, or you know a lot, and maybe even more than me. So you can answer this in the little poll and or type in your answers, whatever works best for you. And I don't think I have I can't see the response, or I can see the responses to it. Okay, awesome. So some of us know nothing about it, but some of us know a little bit. So, and I'm not sure if anyone wants to share what they do know, no pressure to, but hopefully after the webinar, you know a little bit more. Okay. Thank you for answering too. I appreciate it. So if nobody wants to share, I'll move on to the next slide. Yeah, so this, of course, when we're in a attachment webinar, it's really important for us to know what is attachment, especially with some of us coming in with a little bit of knowledge and some of us coming in with not so much. So attachment can be defined as a deep and enduring emotional bond between two people with the function of establishing comfort, closeness, and security. So attachment really is that lasting psychological connectedness between human beings. But the type of attachment that forms can look very different depending on the relationship. And as for attachment theory itself, it is a lifespan model of human development that emphasizes the importance of early attachment relationships. So early attachment relationships is typically like child and caregiver. So what that relationship looks like and what the attachment within that relationship looks like. So it is believed in this theory that it is necessary for survival for a child to develop at least one relationship with a primary caregiver, which makes a lot of sense because when you're a kid or an infant, you need somebody to take care of you. You can't meet your own needs, so you need somebody to be there for you. And the nature of this relationship with that caregiver influences development. So this theory posits that our early experiences in attachment relationships can influence human development, relationships, and behavior later in life. So what are the characteristics of attachment? So John Bowlby is credited as the father of attachment theory. So he studied a lot of the relationships between infants and caregivers, and he believed that there are four characteristics that make up an attachment relationships. So all of these things are present in secure attachment. So basically, these are the things that are typically evaluated when we're assessing the health of attachment in a certain relationship. So if one or more of these things are not present in an attachment relationship, it could indicate less health in the attachment relationship. So in no particular order, these four things are secure proximity maintenance. So what that means is that within attachment, there is a desire to be near the people that we're attached to. So this explains that in attached relationships, there's this tendency for babies or toddlers to keep an eye on their caregivers. So making sure that they're near. So they might be playing on the floor, but they'll look up every once in a while to make sure their parents are nearby. And in later years, this can look like having a desire to be around the people who make us feel safe and secure. So the people you desire to be around more, you're likely more attached to. The next characteristic of attachment, according to John Bowlby, is secure base. So this is basically the idea that an attachment figure acts as a base of security from which the child or a person can explore the world. So this means that a child can explore, play, try new things, but knows that if things get a little bit scary out there, as life does, or they have questions about things, the child would still be able to return to the caregiver for security and support. So basically having the secure base present gives the child the confidence to start to explore the world and try new things, knowing that they have a secure base to fall back on. And kind of related to this is the idea of safe haven. So this is the ability for a child to return to the attachment figure for comfort and safety in the face of threat or fear. So safe haven is the comfort provided when a child does encounter a threat or something scary. So let's say a child is exploring the world because they have this secure base, and then they bump their head. They can run back to their parent who gives them hugs and kisses and tells them everything's going to be okay. So safe haven is the comfort that's provided in times of distress, which is a really necessary part of healthy attachment. And then the last characteristic of attachment, and all of this was found in studies with infant and caregivers. So that's why it's really particular to children and infants, separation distress. So in healthy attachment of children and infants, anxiety occurs in the absence of their attachment figure. So there's often a feeling of sorrow at being separated from their caregiver, which shows an attachment to them. Because as an infant, when you can't see your caregiver, you kind of believe that they no longer exist. So some distress at being separated from their caregiver shows a really healthy form of attachment because you care that they're not there. Yeah, so that's just a little bit about the characteristics of attachment. And next, so these four characteristics, so secure base, safe haven, all that stuff, of attachment look different depending on what type of attachment style is present. Yeah, so and an attachment style describes a person's typical pattern of interacting and behaving in close relationships. And this pattern of interacting is internalized over time, typically based on experiences in other relationships. So generally, there are four types of attachment styles. So one is secure, and then there are three types of insecure attachment, which are anxious, avoidant, and disorganized, all of which we'll explore later and get into the nitty-gritty a little bit more later. But within the three types of insecure attachment, they typically involve attachment injuries of some sort. So this basically means that there's been an emotional wound within the close relationships. So this can happen when somebody isn't consistently responding to your needs, or there's been a breach of trust or something like that. So that is typically present in these types of insecure attachment styles. It's also really important to note that while for a lot of people, their attachment style can be pretty stable across all relationships, it's also possible to have very different types of attachment to different people. So with your mom, you might be anxiously attached and your dad avoidantly attached, and then some friends or a partner securely attached. So it can look different, even though this pattern is typically similar. And in addition to that, I think it's really important to note that even though early attachment does tend to predict attachment later in life, attachment can change and we can all move towards more secure attachment, which we will discuss a little bit more how to later. Yeah. So what are some of the factors that influence what type of attachment or attachment style is formed within a person? So there's a whole bunch of things, and this list is not exhaustive, but here are some of the things that the literature kind of points to. So first involves the level of consistent care. So when children are raised with confidence that their caregiver will be responsive and available to them and their needs, they're less likely to feel anxious or fearful and less likely to feel like they need to be hyper independent. Whereas for those who are raised without consistent responsive care, you're more likely to be anxious or you're more likely to be hyper independent because your experiences made that so it had to happen. Yeah, so level of consistent care is a big one. Next involves early experience. So there's thought to be critical developmental periods in infancy, childhood, and adolescence, where a person's expectations of relationships are formed. So if during this time a child learns that a child learns that their caregiver is consistent and responsive, or they learn that their caregiver is absent and unavailable, or they learn that their caregiver is loving, but they're really inconsistent, whatever they learn in that time can impact their expectations within relationships across the lifespan, creating different patterns of behavior in relationships. So that's like the attachment styles. So for example, if you learn in childhood that your caregiver is unavailable and unresponsive, you may expect others to be like this too. And thus, you might not even approach people for help, or you might not even attempt to create deeper bonds because you just expect that this person's not going to be there for you. Next involves relationship history. So beyond just caregiver-child relationships, it's important to remember that a lot of time has typically elapsed since infancy to adulthood. So with many additional relationships in between. So regardless of the caregiver-child relationship, depending on how responsive and nurturing other deep relationships were, any form of attachment style could be created. So romantic relationships play a really large role here due to the emphasis within our society of their importance and also the intimacy that is held within those relationships. So yeah. And next, attachment style can also be influenced by the subtle accumulation of relational experiences over the lifespan. So even if the relationship with a caregiver as a child or other attachment figures is generally good, insecure attachment can still develop due to many experiences of slightly being missed during little instances repetitively. So this could be like you didn't feel understood by a parent in one regard, and then you didn't feel understood by a friend in another, and continuously adding on over time. So it can all slowly accumulate to create challenges within relational interactions. And I do want to note here also that for parents who typically want their child to have some type of secure attachment, it can all sound really overwhelming, with so much pressure to be perfect to their child, which is an impossible task because we all mess up sometimes. So something I want to emphasize is that secure attachment is not about caregivers being perfect. It's about caregivers trying their best to be responsive, but in times where they do mess up or there is a disconnect, they go back to their child and they repair. So they say sorry, they soothe, you discuss what happened, you try to make the actions different in the future. And the same approach can also be taken within all of our attachment relationships. So like if we mess up in a romantic relationship or a friendship, it's important to repair so that that relationship can stay secure or become more secure. We all mess up sometimes, but we can work to repair. Yeah, so I listed a couple of things that do influence attachment styles, but I'm wondering if anybody else has some ideas of things that do, maybe some specific things that can happen in a relationship. And again, these answers are anonymous, so no worries, whatever you type in. Yeah, just curious about whether there's some specific things that come up. So you can answer that in the little Zoom quiz if you want to, or you can type it in the chat box or whatever. And I don't think I can see the answers to this unless the same thing happens again when we end the survey, if they all come up. But okay, I can't see the results, but yeah, I'm not sure if anyone can.
I can. So I can copy
Yeah.
and paste those in the group chats, but maybe for some of the more written answers,
Yeah.
let's answer those in the chat box if people feel comfortable.
Mhm.
There is also the option to comment in the chat box anonymously.
Mm.
So you
Oh, that's
can,
awesome.
yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I'll read when you send them. I think that's the only open-ended question, so awesome. Okay. Okay. The message I got just says like you can click to view details. So I can't see it, but I do see some people responding in here, which is awesome. So thank you so much. So I see past friendships, generational trauma, and yeah, those are definitely huge things that can really impact attachment style. Okay, now I'm getting more. Okay, so there are also some people that submitted in the Zoom quiz, the ups and downs of romantic relationships, emotions, cultural approaches to parenting, work, abuse, abandonment as a young child, emotionally unavailable parents, relationships like marriage, affairs, parental neglect, trauma, friendship betrayal. And now there's some more addiction. So there's so many different things that really definitely do Yeah. And somebody just added the degree of feeling seen, heard, understood, and supported. Early childhood experiences. Yeah. So all of this completely impacts the attachment style that we carry in life. And a lot of it, yeah, I think that, yeah, we get hurt a lot in relationships sometimes. And there's so many different relationships that we have within our lives. So it makes sense how all of this can really impact us. And I really appreciate all of you sharing those experiences and, yeah, and some of the things that you think can impact it, all of which are definitely true and impact a lot of things. So thank you for discussing that and sharing that. Amazing. Yeah. And we can talk about the specifics of it more too at the end if we have a little bit of time. But yeah, all of that makes a lot of sense. So thank you for sharing. And yeah, so I think knowing about attachment is really important in general, and also our attachment within ourselves. So, like our attachment styles and stuff. So, but why is it so important might be a little bit less understood. So, I think that when we understand attachment, we don't blame ourselves as much for the way that we are in relationships. And we also don't blame others as much for how they are within relationships because our relational behavior is influenced by early patterning that was very much out of our control. And that's not to say that this behavior can't alter or soften or that we should ignore the difficulties in some behaviors, but we can have compassion and understanding for ourselves that there is a good reason for how we are, and it actually makes perfect sense, even if we don't feel like it does at the time. And if we are in a relationship with somebody who has some form of insecure attachment, making it so that they avoid or they deeply fear rejection or abandonment, or can be reactive emotionally at times, knowing about attachment helps to take these types of responses a little bit less personally. Like maybe the reason that they're avoiding is not because of you, because likely a person's patterning within a relationship has very little to do with you and so much more to do with all of the experiences before you, making them want to like avoid intimacy or cling to intimacy strongly. And again, that's not to ignore challenging relational behaviors within ourselves or others, but just to validate that it makes sense and also that we can move towards more security and help our relational partners do the same by just working on security altogether. Yeah, so I think that that's a really important way to develop some compassion for yourself by knowing about your own attachment. Something I also really want to highlight about attachment is that it aids in survival. So whatever our attachment style is, was at some point a functional survival and adaptive response. So our patterning within relationships is an adaptation that makes perfect sense based on our background and experience. So when trying to attach to a caregiver as a kid makes the smartest and most resilient response possible in their situation. In all forms of attachment, whether secure or insecure, a kid is trying to forge connection in the best way possible, truly doing the best they could with the cards that they were dealt. So, for example, if a parent is loving sometimes, but absent other times, it creates a fear of abandonment in a child, making them not want their caregiver to leave. So they may cling to their attachment figure strongly so they don't have the chance for that caregiver to leave and abandon them. So see how this behavior, so this clinging, maybe more distress showing in a child is a child trying to survive by keeping their caregiver close in order for their needs to be met so that they're not abandoned. So it's an adaptive response, which can then transcend into later relationships because a person comes to expect the thing that they learned in relationship when they were really young. So in this example, they come to expect abandonment. So they might continue that fear of abandonment later in life. And lastly, if we know about attachment and what our attachment style is, it gives us the awareness about ourselves. And with this awareness, we have the opportunity to try to move towards more secure attachment or just understand why we are the way that we are a little bit more. Yeah. So now we're getting into the attachment styles more specifically now. So for the first attachment style, secure attachment, how does this typically develop? And I do want you to hear me emphasize typically with all of these attachment styles, because this is all typical ways it develops or typical ways a person behaves with this attachment style, but there are exceptions. And yeah, so we need to make space for that. So secure attachment typically develops when attachment figures are consistently responsive. So if their child was to need something, there would be a quick and consistent response to this. So that's a big one. Next, there is safety and security within the environment so that the child can explore and learn and grow. So that's kind of like that secure base. It's hard to explore and learn and grow when the environment feels unsafe. So if the environment did feel unsafe, it would make sense to hold on to your attachment figure a little bit more tightly, which is a quote unquote less secure type of behavior, but it makes sense in that situation. So typically safety in environment is important to develop secure attachment. Next, the child feels seen emotionally and needs are attended to. This is a huge thing in developing secure attachment. So with this, a child's is taken care of with basic survival needs, so like food, shelter, but also attended to for emotional needs, comfort. They're supported in developing skills, but they're also supported in their independence and exploration of the world. So yeah, all needs, whether emotional, autonomy needs, like all that stuff is taken into account typically when secure attachment develops. Next, when a caregiver is unresponsive to a need or loses their temper, or there's a moment of disconnection with a child, they tend to repair. So they repair through comfort, soothing, apologies. They don't leave an attachment injury unattended to, which helps secure attachment to develop. And another one that I didn't put on here just because it's like a quick point is that typically a securely attached child tends to be played with more. So there's that room for fun and joy and all that type of stuff within that relationship. And there are some typical characteristics of secure attachment across the lifespan. So in childhood, a securely attached child will seek comfort from their caregiver. They typically have a willingness to separate from their caregiver. So they may be initially distressed, but they're able to calm themselves down and regulate. Next, upon reuniting with their caregiver, the child greets them positively and with joy. So they're happy that their caregiver is returning to them. And a securely attached child typically prefers their caregiver over strangers. And then in adulthood, securely attached adults tend to be able to develop trusting relationships. They tend to have more positive relationships with themselves. There is a willingness to seek social support when needed. They're able to share their feelings with others. They feel more comfortable depending on others and also allowing others to depend on them. And they are both comfortable with separation and connection. So secure attachment is really this equal balance of connection and making sure that is filled, while also separation and autonomy doesn't get left behind in that. So there's that equal balance between the two. And the next style of attachment that we'll be talking about is avoidant. So those who develop avoidant attachment typically have caregivers who lack responsiveness to a child's emotional needs and distress. They may be unavailable, they may be neglectful, or they may reject their children. And this lack of responsiveness may be out of deliberate neglect, or it could come from busyness or time constraints. So it's not always super malicious, but it can still have similar effects. Children who develop avoidant attachment have the experience of reaching out to their caregiver and no one is there. So whether their caregiver is completely absent or only supports the child in select areas, but is unresponsive in other areas. So for example, maybe a parent is really good at teaching them a skill, but doesn't tend to them emotionally. That could still create some type of reach that they aren't getting responded to with. So for an infant or a child to reach in whatever way and find no one there is really, really terrifying. So in these cases, a child or an infant will internalize the feeling that no one is there for them, so they tend to be there for themselves and on their own way too early. So oftentimes these children will react to this with reactive autonomy. So they become very self-sufficient, which is great on its own. But it's more of a challenge when underneath the self-sufficient, they feel unable to get their needs met, they feel unsupported, they feel that they can't depend on someone else, and they may carry the assumption that their needs won't get met, so why even ask? Yeah. And yeah, so these people with avoidant attachment carry certain characteristics typically across the lifespan. So in childhood, a child may be avoidant of their caregiver with a lack of desire to be close, so kind of like disinterest. In addition, they may show little preference for their caregivers over strangers, showing that there's a difficulty in attaching to their caregivers. And lastly, they tend to not seek caregivers for comfort or contact. So they tend to be more inclined to handle things on their own at a really early age. In adulthood, someone with an avoidant attachment style will have more difficulty with intimacy in close relationships. They might show less investment in their social and romantic relationships. They might have difficulty sharing their thoughts and feelings with others. They might have a preference for independence over togetherness, and they might find difficulty in leaning on other people. So these people tend to prefer independence over connection, typically, but maybe unconsciously or low beneath the surface, they may desire more closer connection. Yeah, so that's a bit about the avoidant attachment type. And the next attachment style we're talking about is anxious attachment. So how does anxious attachment typically develop? So someone who develops an anxious attachment style typically has a caregiver that is loving, but they are inconsistent. So a person with this attachment style is often raised in an environment of unpredictability, where they sometimes receive caring and attentive care, but sometimes receive unresponsiveness and a lack of availability. So in this situation, a caregiver will show love to their kid and then get preoccupied with something else. So from the kid's perspective, they're like receiving this love and care and it feels really good. And then they're starting to settle into it. But before they can, like, boom, connection disappears. So because of this unpredictability, not knowing if you'll be receiving love or absence, it creates a state of anxiety. So will they love me now? Will they stay with me now? How can I mold myself to acquire their love better? So this is, of course, an unstable pattern for a child to experience, where everything is unpredictable and a child is chronically disappointed. So this dynamic can create anxious attachment, where someone really wants a relationship, but they're also really scared that this person will abandon them, creating kind of like a state of limbo and anxiety. And that when they do get into a relationship, there's a desire to really like hold on and hold on tight. Yeah. So characteristics of this across the lifespan, typically in childhood, these children tend to be greatly distressed when their caregiver leaves, beyond the typical distress of a caregiver leaving. But in addition to this, when their caregiver returns, they don't feel comforted and they remain in distress. These children also tend to be wary and untrusting towards strangers. Whereas in adulthood, people with this type of attachment style tend to hold a significant fear of abandonment and rejection within their relationships. And because of this fear, they tend to become preoccupied and hypervigilant with their relationships. So they scan for nonverbal cues of rejection and abandonment. So with this attachment style, people tend to desire closeness and really struggle with separation. So connection is emphasized over like autonomy or separation. And the last attachment style we'll be going over is disorganized attachment. So how does disorganized attachment typically develop? So disorganized attachment tends to be less formulaic than anxious, secure, and avoidant attachment. Instead, disorganized attachment is a combination of anxious and avoidant attachment types in a way that can look different for each person. So one person with a disorganized attachment may lean more towards avoidant, or they may lean more towards anxious, or they may oscillate strongly between both. But basically, you just have elements of both the avoidant and the anxious attachment type. Usually, someone with disorganized attachment was raised in a situation of chaos or terror, whether that meant abuse of any kind, substance misuse, yelling, all of that type of stuff. So in this situation, it seems that the attachment system is really trying to get the kid to connect, like go towards your caregiver, like try to seek a connection. But because of terror and chaos, the survival system, so like fight, flight, freeze, fawn, is also active at the same time. So the survival system is trying to protect the kid against the trauma and terror to allow them to survive. So there's this stuckness of approach, like I want to connect with you, and avoid, I want to run away because this is unsafe. So this creates a recipe for freeze because these two very different and very strong systems are dragging the person in two different directions. Yeah, so typically the characteristics of disorganized attachment across the lifespan are in childhood, there is a mixture of avoidant and anxious behaviors. So maybe disinterest in the parent in 1 minute, and then another minute, significant distress when they leave. These children may seem dazed, apprehensive, or confused. And many of these kids may actually be put in the role of caregiver towards their parents at a really young age. Yeah, and then in adulthood, there tends to be a strong need for connection with their partner, but also a struggle to tolerate the emotional closeness when they do start to connect. It feels uncomfortable and then they want to bolt. So these adults can have difficulty trusting in their relationships, and relationships can sometimes feel a little bit more chaotic, with the desire for connection and separation battling really, really strongly within. Yeah. So whether you learned it from the attachment quiz we did before, or you're starting to think about what attachment style you are right now as we're talking about the different types of attachment style, I'm just curious what you think your attachment style is. And again, this is anonymous. So yeah, feel free to share if you want to. And I think I should be able to see the results once we close it. Yeah, okay. So I'm not sure if everyone can see the results, but I'll just say them. So it seems like we have 22% secure, 11% avoidant, 56% anxious, and 11% disorganized. So like quite a big range. We all have, some of us, in whatever attachment style there is. Yeah, and I think this might reflect some of the literature too. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's a power to know your attachment style in a way. And now we're going to talk about moving towards more secure attachment. So remember, Like I mentioned earlier, we can all move towards more secure attachment, no matter how tricky your attachment feels or sounds. So we can all learn to calm down and soothe an overactive attachment system and anxious attachment. We can learn how to lift the brake on the attachment system and avoid an attachment. And we can learn to do a mix of both for disorganized attachment. So for anxious attachment that leans on connection at expense of separation, or avoidant that leans on separation at expense of connection, we can learn to find the balance between separation and connection. We get hurt in relationship and we can also heal in relationship in ourselves and with others. So how can we work towards developing more secure attachment? So I've compiled some ideas, but again, this list is not exhaustive. There are many additional ways of developing more secure attachment, maybe some things you're already doing, but these are just some additional things and we can see what you think about them. So first, there is something really big about eye gaze. Because when we feel shame, we tend to avert our gaze. And there's other factors with eye gaze that may cause somebody to look away and make eye contact really challenging. But a big component of it in some cases is shame. So sometimes in relationship, a person may be showing us kindness, but we can't even take it in because we can't even look at them. We're so caught in our shame. We're living in the expectations we hold about relationships from the past that maybe aren't as true anymore. So there's this exercise called the kind eyes exercise, which I heard about through Dr. Diane Poole Heller, which is a huge name in the attachment field. So if you want to look her up, she's got like tons of things online. So the kind eyes exercise involves you closing your eyes or sitting with your eyes open if that feels better for you, and just kind of imagining kind eyes looking back at you. And you don't have to just look at the eyes, like you can think about the whole face because that might feel weird to just think about eyes. So these can be the eyes of like kind strangers. It can be role models that you look up to. Friends, partners, animals is a big one, like maybe your dog or something. So someone famous that you look up to, or whoever else might look at you with kind eyes. So this can be really, really hard to do for some. So give yourself room for that it's okay that if it's hard. But as much as you can, just within this exercise, and you don't have to do it now, it's something that you can try later or now. Try to look into those kind eyes and allow that feeling of kindness to come in. So noticing the admiration that they hold in their eyes and the warmth that they feel towards you. Allow the kindness to like impact your body, allow yourself to feel it. However, if you can't and it feels like a wall is coming up, just notice that. Like explore the wall that's coming up. What is within the wall? What is the wall made out of? How tall is it? See if you can process some of that wall and maybe even see if the wall is willing to come down so you can try again further to take the kindness in. So this is an exercise that you can practice frequently, maybe whenever you go to bed. You can just think about some kind faces and eyes looking at you and trying to take that kindness in. And sometimes after doing this and truly taking in the love and kindness that you can imagine in this scenario, when real attachment figures in your life show kindness and love, you can then try to take that in. You can try to stay present with their love and kindness for you. And you can notice what happens inside your body when you take in kindness and love and you sit with it. And again, for some people, eye contact is a bit much, but you can do this without eye contact too. Maybe really listen to kind words or something like that and see if you can internalize it a little bit. Next, if you're in connection with another person or like multiple people, work on comings and goings. So coming and going, so like leaving, saying hello, saying goodbye, is so important for attachment because it relates to abandonment. So with your attachment figures, such as like romantic partners is a big one. ask yourself how the two of you greet each other. So when you come home from a day at work, do you properly greet each other, or do you just like yell hi across the house and continue on independently? Changing or adjusting the comings and goings can be such an important part of attachment to work on, trying to make the greeting deliberate and specific. So, like, take time to greet each other and focus on each other in this. And one way to do this, one way to do this that can foster more secure attachment is like full body hugs. So, hugging belly to belly, body to body, and stay in that hug until you feel each other's bodies regulate and relax. So maybe it takes a minute for the person that you're doing this with, for their shoulders to untense, to like calm, or maybe it takes a minute for your own breath to be released, like a breath you didn't even know you were holding. So like wait for that regulation. So this co-regulation will boost signals of attachment, moving you more towards more secure attachment. Next, or it's kind of under the same umbrella, but you can work on goings. So whether that's before bed, if you like live with a partner or something, or when you're saying goodbye for the night, maybe you create a nighttime or a goodbye like ritual. So maybe it's like you spend some deliberate time recapping your day. You spend time hugging belly to belly. You spend time brushing your teeth together, prepping your iced coffees for the morning. So you do these things together and you notice the togetherness, the safety, and the comfort in that, and focus on each other and really try to like take that in. So this can help also with moving towards more secure attachment. Next, I kind of mentioned it before with some of the elements of somebody who is more securely attached. Like in children, it's proven that children who are played with more develop more secure attachment. And just because you're an adult, or I'm not sure if everyone here is an adult, but if you're an adult, it doesn't mean you have to stop playing. So play more in the way that feels right. So whether that's drawing, playing games, chasing butterflies, swimming, playing mermaids in the pool, like play together with the people that you're attached to or wanting to be more securely attached to. There's something huge to be said about fun together. Next, if there is one relationship that does feel safe to you, or a past relationship that felt safe, whether that's with a person or your dog, cat, bird, bunny, whatever else, spend time with the safety of that relationship and spend time thinking about it and slowing down with the feeling of safety within you when you're with them. So really thinking about that, or even noticing when you are with them, what does it feel like to feel safe? Like, what does it feel like in your body when you know you're safe? And just notice and sit with that for a while and allow it to kind of like integrate into your brain. The more time you spend with that, the more brain real estate that this type of feeling can take up, which can bring about more secure attachment. And those aren't all, and there's way more than this too, but more ways to develop more secure attachment. So one is to visit your younger self. So when attachment worries and fears come up inside, so for example, like they're going to abandon me or no one's going to be there for me, so I have to be there for myself. Oftentimes, it may be like a younger version of yourself that is carrying all these painful expectations about relationships that they learned a really long time ago. So take a moment if you want to visualize your younger self and greet them as an older version of them and make some room for them to share what's happening for them. You can ask yourself what you needed at that time. Maybe you needed a hug. Maybe you needed someone to play with you. Maybe you needed some words of comfort or encouragement, or some room to just feel your emotions. See if you can give that to this younger version of yourself. Next is so particular to anxious attachment. We spoke about how in anxious attachment, the attachment system becomes hyper-focused on cues of abandonment. So next time you notice the cues of abandonment taking the forefront, so you're really thinking like they're gonna leave. See if you can notice that and remind yourself that those cues are in hyper-focus in this type of attachment style, but they don't necessarily tell the whole story. And I am mindful of time. I think that I can go a couple minutes over, but yeah, I'm not sure if everyone else can. So I'll try to rush through. I'm almost done. Next is, so there's these 3 steps to calm an insecure attachment system. So whether the alarm is ringing and screaming cues of rejection or abandonment, or the alarm is ringing to avoid intimacy and not rely on anyone else, there's something that you can try. So first, when you notice that happening for you, um, ask yourself, what am I feeling? So sit with what you're feeling and notice if anything else comes up. So maybe there's like sadness or anger, and then you sit with it longer and more stuff comes up. Just sit with it and acknowledge it for a minute. When our emotions come up, they're trying to communicate something with us. Notice them and make space for them and sit with them and see if any more comes up as you sit with that. And after doing this and validating the emotions that do come up, you can ask yourself, what story am I telling myself about this? Or does this remind me of a certain experience? So just this is about getting curious about what is really going on for you. Maybe when you feel that your partner isn't talking to you, it makes you feel like they don't care about you and ultimately makes you feel unlovable. So this asking yourself this question is just trying to access what story about the initial behavior are you telling yourself? So when he ignores you, what are you telling yourself? And have you felt this before in your earlier relationships? Maybe whatever you unpacked and find here links, or whatever it links to will explain why there's so much reactivity within your attachment system in that moment. And you can just acknowledge and validate all that is going on beneath the surface. And next, you can ask yourself, how can I give myself some of what I was missing when I was younger? If this relates to an old wound, or what I need right now. So give yourself kindness as you access the pain and vulnerability that explains the reactivity. And how can you give yourself this kindness? You can, yeah, give yourself kindness and understanding for the dysregulation in your attachment system, and give yourself some of what you have been missing, maybe much of your life in relationship. So maybe that's kind words, a little self-hug, or whatever else. Just allow yourself to soothe yourself and be there for yourself, maybe in a way that others haven't before. And then if difficulties with attachment feel extreme, you can get yourself set up with a therapist to help support you on your journey to more secure attachment. And maybe it's somebody who has some experience working with attachment, or whoever feels like a good fit for you. So that's just another option if things feel really intense and it's hard to handle on your own. And again, this list is not exhaustive, and I wish we had more time to talk about like so many other ways that we can foster this more, but this is a good place to start. And then just with the take-home message, so it all makes perfect sense. Whatever your attachment is, or the way it creates challenges for you, it makes perfect sense. So your experiences early in life and across life, and other people's experiences early in life and across life, create the attachment that exists. You are not wrong or bad for your attachment being what it is, because of course it is, based on life experience. And at the same time, it doesn't have to be like that forever. So there is evidence that attachment styles can change, and a person can move towards more attachment through some of the ways that we talked about, but also a whole bunch of other ways. So just like the experiences added up to create whatever attachment style that you might have, the healing also adds up. And the corrective experiences that occur later in life also add up. And that's everything. So I know that I finished 1 minute before we're supposed to end, but yeah, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer. Or you can email me, which is ainsley.nofearcounseling@gmail.com. And I'll probably stop sharing so I can see people if people are there. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ainsley. That was so good. I learned a lot. I don't have any questions personally, but does anybody else have any questions or any kind of thoughts or things that we might be able to discuss and kind of build on? Oh, can you see the chat box, Ains?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
opening
perfect.
now. Yeah, yeah. I wish I remembered this, but I think it was like early 1900s or something. So it's quite old. I could be wrong. I know it was in the 1900s. I just don't remember what year, but I think it was pretty early. And I do feel like there is a big renaissance of it right now, and I kind of think that it could be in part because as therapy becomes less stigmatized and as we open up about our emotions a little bit more as a society, I think it makes sense that we start to look at the things that have made us how we are, and more of these theories start to come out of the woodwork, even though they've always been there. But that's a really good question. Yeah. And thank you so much. Okay, I'm just reading the question. That's why I'm staring intently. Um, so yeah, do you recommend couples therapy based on attachment styles